CNN has announced the network is promoting reporter Natasha Bertrand to correspondent, where she will cover politics and national security. Now, Bertrand has long covered the national security beat and was the first to report on the intelligence community's infamous letter decrying the Hunter Biden laptop story as Russian disinformation back in 2020. And in 2021, friend of the show Glenn Greenwald wrote of Bertrand, CNN's new reporter Natasha Bertrand is a deranged conspiracy theorist and scandal-plagued CIA propagandist, adding in the U.S. corporate media, the surest way to advance is to loyally spread lies and deceit from the U.S. security state. Bertrand is just the latest example.
Meanwhile, an apparent bloodbath at CBS News this week saw over 800 employees laid off, including veteran on-air correspondent Catherine Herridge, who previously worked for Fox News, is currently embroiled in a First Amendment case. She refused to comply with a federal judge's order to reveal sources to her reporting on a Chinese-American immigration case. Herridge's final reporting for CBS News was on special counsel Robert Hur's finding on President Biden's alleged mishandling of classified documents, leading some to speculate that that is the cause of her being let go, whether or not that's substantiated.
Sure. So let's start with Bertrand. You saw Glenn Greenwald's previous tweet, really, holding back, mild-mannered as he typically is. But in fact, when she worked for Politico, Natasha Bertrand was the author of the Politico story, which kicked off the Hunter Biden laptop is Russian disinfo story, with the headline, Hunter Biden story is Russian disinfo, dozens of former intel office officials say. Now, of course, that headline is inaccurate because if you read the letter closely, they do not say that the laptop is Russian disinformation. They say it resembles Russian disinformation. It bears the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. So this was a case where, now, I think even their conclusions there were too strong, but the media framing of the letter took a made a much more strident claim because of how Natasha Bertrand framed that article. We now know that it is not Russian disinformation. That has been disproven definitively. This headline remains like this. There's no update to this story that I can tell. So, look, I don't mean to pick on a person who I'm sure has done some fine reporting on other issues, but it does seem like, and again, this was a very important matter in the campaign. Joe Biden, in his debate with Trump, was able to call on the letter and this story to dismiss accusations against Hunter Biden on this basis. So it was a major political issue, and the framing of it was totally dead wrong, and it's frankly on her, or at least, okay, maybe somebody else wrote the headline and she should have said, oh, no, that's wrong, and fixed it quickly. The headline remains under her byline.
I mean, does it feel to you that she's being rewarded for exactly this kind of pro-Russiagate behavior?
Right. That's what people wonder. I mean, how bought into the whole Russiagate narrative many mainstream commentators were on CNN and MSNBC, making it all about that story, even as many of the claims weakened over time for how active Russian disinformation was or how vital it was to the 2016 election. As for CBS, losing 800 employees is a massive, massive hit. Catherine Herridge is someone who was at Fox, as you said, is a, I would say, well-respected national security reporter. I was seeing a lot of tweets in her support from at least some ideological diversity, and is involved in this important First Amendment case where a judge is trying to compel her to give up her source in a case about a Chinese immigrant who I believe was a faculty member somewhere, a professor, and her reporting alleged that this person had ties that were too close to the Chinese government, and the judge wants her to force her to reveal how she got that information. And she's refused, and I believe Fox is still paying her legal bills, but she then moved to CBS and is now being let go. The last tweet being about the her last story being about the Robert Hur kind of taking shots gratuitously at Biden's age. Gratuitously, if you think so, maybe not, or maybe not gratuitous, but I don't know. People are debating what they are.
Yeah,
they may be accurate.
That's the word,
but
by the way, that Kamala Harris kept using at the press conference where she was pushing back. And in a weird kind of Twitter dust-up, Simone Sanders, who was previously Biden's press secretary and then became Kamala's press secretary and is now a pundit over at MSNBC, was critiquing her use of the word gratuitously, saying that it was too...
It was gratuitous?
Yes. It was too big a word, basically, and that she should speak more plainly for the American public. Oh. And then she got a weird amount of flack from the K-Hive. It was a weird and unnecessary Twitter dust up. And
I'm a folksy Midwesterner, and I use the word gratuitous.
Yeah, I don't really know what Simone's angle was on that one. But to the plaudits that Catherine Herridge is getting right now, Michael Schellenberger, friend of the show, tweeted out yesterday that CBS News was one of the most respected names in journalism. That's no longer the case. Today it fired Catherine Herridge, who is facing financial ruin and even prison for protecting her sources. Herridge is a hero. CBS execs have behaved cowardly. Shame on them. And, you know, the Herridge story is one aspect of this, but, you know, hundreds and hundreds of people being laid off at Paramount Global, 800 people on Tuesday, is an enormous blow to a media organization. So the choices about who to cut, as well as the choices of who to promote and who's getting rewarded in this environment, I do think speak more loudly than they might in another kind of just regular kind of promotion and firing cycle. 20 people being laid off at CBS, according to the Wall Street Journal, including Heritage, is quite a blow to any newsroom. Yeah,
and you know, this is coming in the wake of layoffs in a lot of other corners of the media. We talked about the LA Times. There have been so many others. It really is a bad time in the media industry in a lot of, not everywhere. New York Times still doing very well for itself. We still have our jobs, I think, so not everyone, but it's a difficult media environment in the, you know, I explain this to a lot of people, I think, or, you know, just friends of mine or family who ask about, you know, who see headlines like everybody being like, what's going on? What's happened to the media industry? And the simple answer is Facebook. People don't know that social media through the aughts was Facebook in particular was the distribution model for digital non-video content, and that came to an abrupt end when Facebook decided that too much news in your feed was bad for some. I mean, they were yelled at a lot for having too much news in the feed, so I'm not like blaming them necessarily for going in a different direction or feeling that they should go in a different direction, but it reduced that, as a result of that, traffic to news websites reduced dramatically across the board.
Well, also, it's not just the traffic to the website. It's the fact that if it's cheaper and more advantageous for advertisers just to pay Facebook for the
directly
ads instead of placing the ads in the newspapers, then that's a huge revenue source that is lost out by these publications. And we're seeing it change the nature of journalism, and I think exacerbating the crisis, because what's happening is that you're getting less and less original reporting. And so you're getting more talking head pundity coverage that I think is frankly less informative and more divisive than the straight news used to be. And that's driving even more people away from the news, and fewer people are invested in doing actual reporting. So people like David Sirota at The Lever or Jordan Cheriton over at Status Quo, who are still hiring people and buying flights to send them to East Palestine, Ohio, and talk to folks on the ground, or who want to do actual research and reporting into what's going on at Boeing, or following up on some of the stock market allegations of stock market mismanagement on Congress. I mean, that is so few and far between. It is a lot easier, and you know, we're all guilty of this. It is a lot easier to comment on something somebody said in public or tweeted or said on a podcast, but what kind of investigative stories are we missing out on? What kind of corruption are we not learning about anymore because no one's willing to invest in real news?
Yeah, I mean, the model for investigative reporting is changing, and obviously there's a lot of challenges with that. I agree. I mean, a kind of, you know, paying for subscribers and Patreon type things and Substack. You know, a lot of people we have on the show, like Lee Fong and Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi, are doing good. They have commentary, but also with a lot of FOIAs and getting original documents through a lot of, you know, people at The Intercept, people at Reason, where I also work, and it's, you know, it's reader funded or crowdsource funded or subscribers or donors, and I think that's going to be the model for that kind of thing going forward.
That's no substitute for a multi-billion-dollar organization like the New York Times that can have permanent journalists residing in locations all across the country and across the world who speak the language, who can intimately understand a community, and who can get real scoops and make news and not just report on the news that's being put in front of us. There's no substitute for that. And local political news is basically just not covered anymore, which makes everyone have a national focus and glom onto national issue areas that wouldn't necessarily have been organic issue areas for them altogether. So you can live in a city where crime is down and be concerned about crime because you have projected yourself onto what's going on in San Francisco or Chicago or what have you. And it is changing people's political preferences and polarizing the public in ways that I'm not sure are entirely productive. When you don't have your own kind of organic interest base that relates to you, I think you're open to a greater manipulation, frankly, by a national news cycle that might have interests other than simply informing you of what's going on in your community.
Yeah. I should say this is primarily a problem for producers of content through print and digital but written articles, video continuing to take off. I mean, obviously on YouTube, that's where our show is based. People, obviously people are, cutting cable and everything, but people do still watch local television. That's the video is the model for, I think, so much of these things.
These big corporations own all the local television channels, and they're all getting the same news. So I'm sure everyone's seen that dystopian mashup of all of the local news reporters across the country reading the exact same script with the exact same cadence across like dozens and dozens of channels. Is that really local news at that point, or is it just your local figurehead saying the national news in a way that makes you feel like it's intimate to you? I mean, that's what's so dystopian about it.
All right, more Rising right after this.